Hey guys, hello everyone. Welcome to this module 5 of Advanced Java Programming. So in this module we are studying about the JDBC. Okay, so what is JDBC? I guess this term you are quite familiar with your DBMMS which you studied in the previous semester. So let's study it again. Java Database Connectivity, full form. Okay, so what is JDBC? JDBC is a Java API that enables applications to interact with relational databases. Okay, it provides a standardized way for Java programs to execute the SQL queries, retrieving the results and manage database independently of underlying database system. That means Java database connectivity, that is JDBC, is a Java API which will help you to enable the Java, help you to interact the Java application with the relational database. And once you're interacting with the database, we can execute the SQL queries, we can retrieve the results, and also we can manage the database independently and perform some operations. Okay, so let's study this in detail. We have the components of JDBC. First is the JDBC drivers. JDBC driver are the essential components that facilitate the communication between the Java applications and the DBMS. So this is nothing but it will facilitate the communication between my application and the DBMS. So what does the JDBC drivers actually do? First we have the open connection. That means it establishes a connection between the Java application and the DBMS. Then we translate the SQL statements. Translate SQL statements from the Java application into specific syntax that is understood by the DBMS. That means here all that the Java application present, it will translate all the SQL statements into a specific syntax which will be understood by the DBMS itself. Okay. Next we have is the process messages. Sorry, it handles the communication of SQL statements and data between the Java and the DBMS. Next is error handling. Error handling will capture and return error messages conforming to JDBC specification to the Java application. Next we have is transaction management. Provide transaction management capabilities adhering to the JDBC standards, ensuring data integrity and consistency. This we have already studied, I guess, in the previous semester. Nothing but the asset properties of the transaction. This we have to remember. Next is close connection. Close connection is nothing but once the connection is established, finally you have to close it. That is, close the connection between the Java application and the DBMS when no longer needed to free up the resources. Next is JDBC API usage. JDBC API usage, how can we use a particular API? First is to use JDBC in Java application. First is we have to load the appropriate JDBC driver. That is the first process. We have to load the proper JDBC driver class. For that, the syntax is class.forName, driver class name. Next we have to do is establish a communication. For establishing a communication, we need a URL, we need a username, we need a password. Next we create and execute SQL statements. Create and execute statements. Again, any SQL statement can be there. It can be a callable statement, it can be a prepared statement also. Next is process the result sets. That means whatever queries which you are executing, the results will be stored in the result sets itself. Next we have is the handle transaction. Handle transaction means like connection.set auto commit, or its commit or its rollback, depending upon the type of transaction you are performing. And next is you are closing the resources and we are closing the entire all the connections. Moving forward, next, advantages of JDBC. First is database independence. Database independence in the sense JDBC allows Java application to work with different DBMS without modifying the application code significantly. That means the Java application applications can work with different DBMS without any changing the application code. Next is the ease of development. That means it's make it easier to develop database driven applications in Java using this API. It's quite straightforward. Next is integration with Java EE. That means it can integrate with all the Java technologies, allowing for more scalable and robust applications. Next we have is the JDBC architecture. JDBC architecture, for first we have is the Java application, followed by the JDBC API. Then we have the JDBC driver manager. For this JDBC driver manager, we can see it is again divided into three parts. One is Oracle, one is SQL Server, other is the ODBC data sources. Done with the architecture, now let's study with the type of drivers available. First is the type 1 JDBC ODBC bridge driver. Description, what is the description? First, also this JDBC ODBC driver is also known as bridge. It was developed by Microsoft. Functionality, it acts as a bridge between the JDBC and the ODBC, open database connectivity. What is the usage? It allows Java application to access the database through ODBC drivers. Also, it is DBMS independent. That is, it's not totally dependent upon DBMS, but it relies on the ODBC drivers which is installed in the system. Next we have is the Java native code driver. What is the Java native code driver do? It is type 2. It generates platform specific code that interacts with the specific database. That means in type 2 we have a platform specific code or a native code which will interact with the specific database. It is mainly developed by database vendors who provide their own Java native code drivers. Next is portability. Portability, what it will do is it will provide good portability for Java application within the same DBMS vendor ecosystem. Moving forward, what is the advantages? The limitation is it's not compatible with other DBMS vendor database without additional drivers. So that means it doesn't have any additional drivers. That's why it is not compatible with the other DBMS structures. Next is type 3. Type 3 is nothing but network protocol driver. It is also known as the middleware driver, commonly known as middleware driver. Its functionality is it converts JDBC calls into a middleware specific protocol. Now this middleware, what will do is you can see it can act as an intermediate layer between the Java application and the DBMS. And what is the translation? Translation is like translates JDBC calls into the native protocol of the DBMS it communicates with. Okay. Next is Java protocol. It handles communication using a protocol understood by the middleware and the DBMS. That means type 3, if you see, type 3 mainly converts the JDBC call into some middleware specific protocol. And also what is this middleware doing is it acts as an intermediate layer between your application and your DBMS. And also it translates JDBC calls into its native DBMS you can say protocols. And also Java protocol in the same, it will handle communication between the middleware and the DBMS. Next is type 4. Type 4 is nothing but a thin driver direct to database protocol driver. First is type 4. Functionality is nothing but directly converts JDBC calls into its native protocol of DBMS. Efficiency, generally the fastest communication method because it bypasses middleware layers, because it doesn't have any middle layer. That's why it is the most fastest way of communication. Also in usage is like usage for scenarios where direct efficient communication within the DBMS is preferred. Okay, next we have with the steps of the JDBC process. What is the steps of JDBC process? First is the loading of JDBC driver. So before you start with the connectivity, before we use the API, first we'll load the driver first. What is the code for that? Loading the JDBC driver, we use a try block. Class.fontName, it's mainly used for loading the driver. Sun.jdbc ODBC driver. This Sun is nothing but the Sun company from where this API has been taken. JDBC.odbc driver. Then if this particular JDBC driver is not found, e.print stack trace is nothing but an exception which is thrown that no, the driver is not available currently. So let's look at the explanation. The JDBC driver must be loaded into the memory using this class.fontName method before establishing a connection to the database. That means class.fontName is very much necessary and mandatory before you want to establish a connection with the database, and this ensures that driver class is available for use. Like if obviously if this driver is only not available, you can't use it for later purposes. Next, once you load the driver, you have to connect it to the DBMS. Now let's see how you connect. For connecting the DBMS, you need 3 parameters. First is the URL, next is the user ID, next is the password. User ID, let's say it's username, password is password. Here we have passed the URL of this one, you can say JDBC driver. Okay, so this 3 parameters we need. Now try driver manager.get connection, URL, user ID, pass. That means driver.get connection method is basically used for getting the connection with the database, whereas class.fontName method was mainly used for loading the JDBC driver. Same thing goes for the explanation. You can see driver.get connection establishes the connection to a DBMS using a specified URL. We have a username, we have a password, and also connection object, a DB is created. You can see that this DB represents the connection to the database and is used throughout the process to interact with the database. Next is, once you are creating the database, you have to create and execute a query or a statement. So let's see what's happening. First is statement data request is null. Initially, like we are not requesting any kind of data, and now then we are setting the result set, like where you are storing the query result, it is null initially, it's not set to 0. Like we can say in before we don't have anything to store. Next, you start executing the query. What is the query? String query equal to select star from customers. Like you are getting some, you try to fetch some data from the customer's database. You are requesting now here what you are creating, your data request, nothing but what request you want to make from the database and what query is being executed. That is db.create statement. Something is created and then you are executing it in the next line. Result equal data request dot execute query. So dot execute query will help you to execute a particular query. Okay, and create statement is you want to create some particular statement. If some error happens, it will go to the cache block. Okay. Next is the statement connection dot create statement. What it will do is it will create a statement object that is a data request that can be used to execute the SQL queries against the database. That means this create statement, what it will do, it will help me to execute a type of query in the database. Okay, now execute query, what will do is it will execute that particular SQL query and return the value in the result set containing the data retrieved from the database. Okay, so like once you execute the query, suppose I want some 10 books from recent authors, so that 10 value will be stored in the result set and that again has to be retrieved into the database itself. Let's move forward. Now you're already done with the creating and executing a statement. Once creating and executing is done, you have to process data returned by the DBMS. Now next what we are doing is, like for example, processing data. Here we have a try block again, results.next. What we are doing is, in this particular book example, we are trying to get the first name of a particular customer. So string fname equal results.getString. You are getting the first name of the customer, then process the data and print the data. Okay, now catch again, if there is an error is occurring, it will come in the SQL exception. Then you are using a final keyword. Final keyword, what will do is it will close the result data set and the statement. So if any suppose for example, if I want to execute a query which is not fetching any kind of result, so what to do? So here, if results not equal to null, result dot close. If result request not equal to null, then data request dot close. That means if result is only if you're not getting any result only, then directly you close it, and if data request is not there, then data request dot close method is used. Same explanation is there. Result set dot next moves the cursor to the next row of the result set. Okay, here you can see if some next method was used, nothing but you are going to the next row to fetch the next data. Next is get string first name, nothing but from the column you are getting the first name of the particular customer, and you are using a loop which will help you to iterate through each row of the result set and process the retrieve data. That means in all the you can say using this loop, what we can do is we can get each row of the result set and we can process the retrieve data. Now you are done with your query execution. You already got the result. Next final step is to terminate and end the connection with the DBMS. First is try if db not equal to null, db dot close. That means if the database connection is only not there, directly you close it. Next we have is JDBC connection methods. JDBC connection method, first is the get connection method. Get connection method will take one parameter, that is string URL. What it will do is you are passing the string URL as jdbc.mysql. You have used the local host and my database. Okay. Once it is done, you try to load the JDBC driver. For JDBC driver loading, we use class.forName method, which is nothing but it will take the path of the JDBC driver. Then you establish a connection. Connection DB is driver manager.get connection URL, the same URL which is passed here. Then we use this particular connection. We are performing some sort of operation. And again, if you can see if kind of some error is happening, then it will come to the exception block. Explanation. Purpose, what is happening is this method is used when the database grants access without requiring a username or a password. That means get connection method, since it is using only the URL, you can say it is used mainly when I don't want to give my username and the password. Next is the URL format. What about the format of the URL? The URL parameter specifies the JDBC URL for connecting to the database, which includes protocol, the driver name and the database name. That means the URL format only is set in such a way that it will specify like with what JDBC I want to connect, what are my protocols, what are my driver name, and what is my driver name and what is the database name. Next is usage. Usage is mainly used like for database access does not require authentication, obviously, because here you are not giving any you can say username and password, so it is mainly used when you don't require this kind of authentication. Next is get connection method using string URL, string user, string password. What we are doing is in string URL, you are passing the entire URL itself. That is jdbc.mysql localhost my database. You are passing the user as username as username, again password as password. Then it try to execute class.forename for loading the JDBC driver. Establishing a connection is done. Then once you do all this connection, if some error is there, e.print stack trace. Explanation, what is this? It is used when database requires authentication with the username and password. Because we have already seen here we are passing the username and the password. That's why whenever you need an authentication, we are using this method. What is this URL format? Same URL format as discussed before. In the URL format only, you are mentioning the JDBC name, the password, the device name, everything. Next is username and password. The credentials has to be given to access the database, and usage, same thing, it is used in production environments. Next we have is the get connection string URL and properties group. What is happening? First we are giving the URL itself. Next we are doing is properties props equal to new properties. Okay, just one object of properties like is created. You can say props.set property. You are just setting the value of user and password name. It's like another way of storing the username and the password. Okay, another way of declaring it, you can say. Then try. Then what happens in try block? You are loading the JDBC driver class.forename. You are establishing the connection driver manager.get connection URL and props. Then there's a catch block. If some kind of exception is happening, throw it in the catch block itself. Okay. What is the explanation? Purpose used when database requires additional properties besides username and password for authentication. That means here, if I want, like normally in JDBC, normally in this database manipulation and all, we need a URL, username and password. But if we need anything more than that, like if I want a particular database engine only, whether I want to use MySQL, SQLite3 or a MongoDB, so here in this way we can use this particular method. Also we have properties object. The props parameter is a properties object that contains key value pairs of additional properties required by the database. That means it is mainly implement the dictionary concept here. I guess dictionary, you are quite familiar with the Python concepts you have already studied in your subjects like FSD and full stack development, or what is a dictionary. So this is all about the key value pairs. Next is the loading properties. Loading properties is like properties can be loaded from a configuration file also. For example, if I have a text file which has all necessary configurations, I can load those properties. I can load that text file also. And what is the usage? Usage is mainly used in connection pooling, parameters, etc. Next we have is timeout. What is timeout? Timeout is competition for data usage. In J2EE environments, multiple components may compete for database resources, potentially causing performance degradation. That means at a time, more than one users can try to interact with the database or to access the database, which can result in the performance degradation. Also delayed database availability. Sometimes connections to the database may experience delays as well. So that's then what happens is we have a delayed access to the database. Next you have the setting login timeout. That means this driver manager.set login timeout function, what will do, it allows setting a time period in seconds for establishing a connection. After this period, if the connection cannot be established, a SQL exception is thrown. That means you are giving a particular time slot, like for example, in this particular 1 hour only, I will be accessing the database. After that, I won't be able to access. Now, if the user who is accessing that particular database, if he tries to access after the next hour, he won't be able to access. So that is one of the major flaws here. Okay. Next is the getting login timeout. Login time, nothing but it retrieves the current login time setting in seconds. Next we have is connection pool. Connection pool in the sense connection like applications requires frequent database interaction and face performance issues if they repeatedly open and close the connections. Now, leaving the connection ties up the resources and limits database access. So connection pool in the sense why we need the connection, basically to interact with the database itself. Now what happens is this continuous opening and closing of the connection sometimes can affect the performance of the system, and also it will limit the access to the database sometimes. So problems with open and close approach, what happens is open connections can limit database access for others, while reconnecting frequently is also time consuming, because once you're connecting, once you are closing it off, sometimes again establishing connection one after the other is too much time consuming also. Introduction to connection pooling, already it's done. Concept of connection pool. A connection pooling involves precasting a set of database connections that are stored in the memory. These connections can be reused, eliminating the need of repeated connection establishment. That means that we are just setting a database connection that has to be stored in the memory, and in that memory only these connections in that memory, and also this connection can be reused, and also we can eliminate the repeated setting up of the connection establishment. Okay, next is data source usage. It has to be, that means data source is used to access the connection pool, typically implemented in application servers. Next we have is types of connection. We have a logical connection, a physical connection. The logical connection is managed by the application server, whereas the physical connection is used by the database interactions. Next we have is a data connecting to a connection pool. Now how will you connect a database to a connection pool? First is context of context equal to new initial context. This line is important. Followed by that we have a data source pool from where you are trying to look up, that is this particular database, you can say JDBC driver you have passed, and then you have passed a parameter of get the connection. What is the explanation of the code now? First we have is the initial context. What is this initial context? It initializes the context for looking up the resources. That means this method will help me to look for resources. Okay, done with the initial context. Next is context.lookup. What will do is it will retrieve the data resource named as pool defined in the application service environment. Basically it will help you to retrieve the data. That's it. Pool.get connection, it will help me to establish a connection which will be managed by the application server. Next we have is a statement object in JDBC. Statement object in JDBC is used to execute SQL queries against a database. Same thing. Now what will you do? First is the immediate execution. The statement object executes SQL queries immediately without pre-compiling them. That means if you are passing a statement object only, it will execute without even pre-compiling the query. Next is executing query with execute query method. So this execute query method is used to execute select queries that retrieve the data from a database. Same thing, it is also a method, you can say, which will help you to retrieve a data from a particular database by executing a type of query. So let's see the code. Yes, so as usual, first URL, user ID, password passed. Okay, a statement you have created, connection DB for establishing the connection link, also a result set for storing the result. Try class.forename is nothing but for loading the JDBC driver and connect to the database. You are executing a query, nothing but you are just want to select from the customer table. You try to create one statement and then you execute one query there. Then you process the result set. In the result set, what I need is I need the customer name and the age also. So my SQL query will be in such a way like it will fetch the customer's name as well as the customer's age as well. Now if it encounters any error, it will come in the catch block and it will handle the exception. This e.print stack trace is all used for handling the exception in JDBC. Okay, now next is finally method is like if you are trying to execute any query which will not retrieve or give you any value, then this not equal to null sign is used. Same thing, done. Now next is DML and DDL operation with execute. What is DML and DDL operation? You have already studied in DBMS. The various kind of operations like create, insert, delete, update, read, all those kind of operations, right? So let's discuss. Execute update method of statement is used for executing the data manipulation language DML. That means this execute update method is mainly used for DML commands and or the DDL commands like insert, update, delete and create. It will return an integer indicating the number of rows it is affected. That means using this execute update method, it will return an integer which will indicate the number of rows it was affected. Now let's see this. We have a query like first we update customer, set paid equal to y where balance is 0. That means we're trying to update a particular customer database where you can see the balance was 0 and the same time the set paid value is set to yes. Okay, now you're creating a statement head and then execute update. That means nothing but it with this particular, you can say this particular line of code will return the integer indicate how many rows were affected while executing this DML or DDL command. Okay, so this will print number of rows updated or affected If any error occurs, it will come in the e.print tax trace, or else final keyword in the sense like if no value was there in a particular query, then it will show null, and then we close the connection of the database. And again, some any error occurs in closing the connection, one more catch statement is there for handling the error. Next we have is calling a stored procedure. To call a stored procedure in JDBC, you use a callable statement. Callable statement is nothing but a subclass of prepared statement. Let's see the example. Okay, again a try block. Callable statement equal to db.prepareCall. What is this callable statement? Callable is nothing but one object of callable statement. You can say it's created to store the call procedure. Then again you are passing a set string in the sense first you pass the you can say the id, then you can primary key only, then you're passing the parameter value, then again second, and again one parameter value. Then you execute the stored procedure. Execute the stored procedure by this command callable statement dot execute method. Now once it is done, you optionally retrieve. Now my next job will be to retrieve the output parameters of the result sets. How will you retrieve? Retrieve is nothing but you are getting the value back, like whatever query you've executed, I need that value back again, right? That's all about this method. So catch SQL exception e.print stack trace. Again, this callable method is again this try catch block is used if callable statement is not equal to null. That means if particular query I'm not getting any kind of result, again close it. Then if database connection is not equal to null, that means if database connection is there, so just close the connection because already I have done my work. Then again if any error is occurring, then again throw an exception block. Okay, what is the explanation? Callable statement is used to call stored procedures. Parameters are set using the setX methods. Use execute method to store procedure, and handling the results, retrieve output parameters if applicable. Moving forward, prepared statements. What is a prepared statement? Prepared statements in JDBC will help you to allow efficient execution of parameterized SQL. Okay, like if you have a parameterized SQL, then it is very much essential to use the prepared statements. So what is the brief explanation? Let's see. First is compilation and execution. SQL queries are compiled by database management systems before execution using prepared statement. That means using prepared statement, the SQL queries are compiled by the DBMS. Then we have parameterized queries. That means we have something known as placeholders. Placeholders will be normally represented by this question mark values. They are used in this query string to represent parameters whose value will be supplied later. That means before only you are passing this question mark value, which will indicate that later some values will be given. Okay. Next is setting parameters. Setting parameters are mainly used to set the values of. Okay, so that's what about the result set does. So here what we have done is, again we are in the final block we are checking whether if the particular query which I am executing is giving any value or not. So if it is not giving, then simply close it. Then just be statement dot close, followed by that we are closing the DBMS connection. Next. Okay, so let's this is the explanation of the whole program. So what we have done is how to use prepared statement to execute a parameterized select query. First is the step 1, we load the JDBC driver and establish a connection. Next, we define a SQL query with the placeholder or question mark for the customer number. Next, we create a prepared statement object using the query string. Next, we have the set the value of placeholder using the setString method. Step 5, execute the query with the execute query method and retrieve the results into the result set. And finally, we process the result set and fetch the data and display retrieved from the database. Okay, so next we have is the callable statements object in JDBC. So what the callable statement in JDBC does is it used to store the call procedures from within a Java application. So what is the brief explanation? Let's see. First, like calling the stored procedure. Stored procedure is a named block of code stored in the database, typically written in languages like Transact TSQL for SQL Server or PLSQL for Oracle. Okay, next we have is the parameters in the callable statement. What are parameters we pass? Callable statement supports 3 types of parameters: in, out, and in out. The in parameters are used to pass values into the stored procedure using the set method. The out parameters are used to retrieve values returned by the stored procedure. They are registered using the register out parameter method for fetching using the getX method, and the inout parameters serve as the dual purpose, that is passing data into and retrieving data from the stored procedure. That means both the operations it is performing. Let's look into the example. Import java.sql to this, and java.sql package is mainly used for dealing with all the database operations. Next we have is public static callable statement example. Let's see what's happening. So yeah, we can see that we have passed the string URL, user, and the password. We have passed. Next is the connection is null. Callable statement is also null, and the result set is also stored as null. Next, we are just creating a connection with the database. We are loading the JDBC driver first. You are creating a connection with the database. Next, you prepare the callable statement to call the stored procedure. How to call the stored procedure? Again, same thing, using question mark. This value will be passed later. This prepare for the callable statement. We set the input number. It is employee ID. That is first one, an employee first entry with 101. Then we register out. That is, we pass out the values in the employee first as varchar. So why varchar? Because a string is used for storing this value. Then you try to execute this this statement procedure. Then once you retrieve the output values, then what will happen is string employee first name equal to cstempty.getString2. Then next will be you just print the employee with the particular ID along with his first name. Okay. Next is nothing but you the catch block, and also whether the query will return a particular result or not. So it is the explanation of this entire program we can see, and this demonstrates how to use a callable statement to call a stored procedure in Oracle version. Okay. Next is step 1. We establish a connection to the Oracle database using the driver manager.getConnection method. So just remember this name, .getConnection method is used for establishing the connection with the Oracle database. Next we have is the prepare callable statement. Prepare callable statement is passing 2 question mark values for now, so that later again it gets the value from set in and set in and out parameter. Next is set the in parameter using the set int value. Register out the out parameter using the register out parameter. Next is execute the stored procedure using this execute method. And next is you retrieve the value of the out parameter using the get string. So that's all about this explanation of this program. Moving forward. Result set. What is result set? Why we need a result set? Result set object allows a Java program to retrieve and process data returned by a SQL query. It's very self-understanding, guys. Like it's an object only which helps to retrieve and process the data returned by an SQL query. Now, how it helps in organizing the data? Data in the result set is logically organized into a virtual table containing rows and columns. It includes metadata describing the structure of the result set. That means it is locally organized into a virtual table where it contains all the rows and columns, and also it includes metadata information which gives the structure of the result set. We have something known as virtual cursor. Virtual cursor is to navigate through the rows of the data. Initially the cursor is positioned before the first row. The next method moves the cursor to the next row. Very much important, guys. By default, first we have the cursor is always positioned to the first row itself. Once it is done, then once the first row operation is done, it will again use the next method to move to the next row. Next is access method. Access data, what it will do is it will use certain methods like getInt method and getString method to retrieve data from the current row pointed by the cursor. Okay, now this method name, that is getInt getString, should be correspond to the data type of the particular column. Yes, for example, you can say getInt can only be used for fetching any kind of integer type data only, like you can say employee ID or something, whereas getString can be used to take only the string type of values, for example name and all. Next is iterating to the result set. Iterating in the sense to process each row in the result set, we use a loop for that. Basically we use a while loop only, which can be combined with the next method to move to the next row until all rows are processed. Let's look into this code. String URL, string user, string password. Again, you are trying to get the database, this one, JDBC driver. You are just creating a statement. This is the SQL query. Okay, you want only to select the ID, first, last, age from employee table. Then what we are doing is we are iterating through each and every result set. For that we have used a while loop. Here we have passed the get int, that is ID, get int age, and get string as first, get string as last. That means the integer, that means I have assumed ID and age are integers, okay, followed by first and last are my strings. Now we print each and every row. How will you print each and every row? Just system dot out println ID, age, name and last. Then you close the resources, rs.close, statement.close, connection.close. If any exception is occurring, then throw the exception. Same explanation of the code. It establishes a connection to the database, creates a statement, executes a particular query, iterate through the result set, retrieve the values, close the result. Next is scrollable result set. Scrollable result set in JDBC allows for navigating both the forward and backward through the result set, allows supporting positioning of the cursor at specific rows. That means using scrollable result set, we can put the cursor in any kind of specific row we want. Okay, so enhanced cursor movement, like result sets were only forward moving, and latest versions, result sets can be scrollable, meaning you can move the cursor to specific rows or move backward to the result set also. Okay, methods for cursor positioning. What are the methods? We have a first, last, absolute, relative, previous, get row. Let's study in detail. First, positions to the cursor at the first row, last at the last row, absolute, move the cursor to a specified row number, relative, moves the cursor relative to a current position by the specified number of rows. That means it will move the cursor to a particular current position as specified by the number of rows. That means depending upon the number of rows, it will move to the current particular kind of position. Then we have previous, move the cursor to the previous row, get row, returns the current row number. Scrollable result type, 3 scrollable result type forward, scroll insensitive, scroll sensitive. Forward moves only forward. Scroll insensitive means allows scrolling in both direction, insensitive to the changes. Then scroll sensitive, scrolling in both directions, sensitive to changes made by others. Let's understand this better in the code. So yeah, you can see. So guys, you might think the code is so long, but if you remember the steps, the code is actually not long though. Okay, if you remember the algorithm, like first you load the driver, then you set up the connection, then you then you start executing a query, you are retrieving the query, then again you are closing the database connection. If you remember all those steps, the program is very much easy. Rest all you can also even write. Okay, same thing, import MySQL for MySQL, then URL, user, password you are passing. Again try to get a connection with the JDBC driver. Followed by that we are creating a callable statement. That means it has to be type scroll, it has to be scrollable, insensitive, and it has to be in read only mode only. That next we are doing an SQL query operation. That means select star from employee. From employee we try to get something. Okay, we are executing one query, we are going to the last row, then we are printing the last row only. From the last row we are printing the ID, name, salary. Okay, once it is done, we are going to the first row, then we are printing the first row, first ID, first string, well, first name and first salary. Now this is done. Now if you want to move to a specific row, that means first you are seeing rs.last will take me to the last row, rs.first will take me to the first row. What about any specific kind of row? rs.absolute 2. That means this absolute method will help me to shift to a particular position, that is 2. So from the second row I can collect the row information, that is the ID, name and salary. Okay, then you close all the connections, then again print start. What is the explanation of this code? First is connection establishment. We establish a connection to the database using the get connection method. What is the statement creation? It is all scroll insensitive. Query execution, execute a SQL query. Cursor movement, it demonstrates the moving of the cursor to all the different rows. We have used the last row, first row as well as the second row. Retrieval, that means retrieves and prints the data from different rows. Next is resource management. Resource management closes the result set, statement and the connection to ensure that proper resources are released and cleaned up. Updatable dataset, result set. Updatable result set in JDBC allows modifications to the rows retrieved from a database table directly to the result set itself. That means you can update. Now how? By specifying the result set dot conquer updatable. When creating a statement, the result set allows for updates, deletions, insertion directly to the underlying data source. That means if you add this particular line, result set dot conquer updatable, we can perform all the operations like updation, deletion as well as insertion. This means that changes made to the result set can affect the database once appropriate methods like update row, delete row and insert row are called. That means using this particular commands like update row, delete row and insert row, we can start doing the modifications, right? Then next we have is updating row in dataset. How will you update a row? After retrieving a result set using execute query, you can update columns in a current row using the update xx methods. That is update string, update init. Once all the updates are applied, call the update row to commit these changes back to the database. That means using this update row method and along with that update string and update int, we can commit any changes to the database. For example, let's see this code. We have this query to select the first name as well as last name from customers, where first name is Mary and the last name is Smith. So we are just creating a statement. A statement is like create statement should be type score is always type score is sensitive as well as result dot set conquer updatable. That means here we can updatable result data set it is. That means we can do the changes like updations, deletions and insertions. So next let's see, you are just executing a query if rest dot next. That means if you're moving to the next row, rs dot update string last name should be Johnson, rs dot update row, that means update the last name. Okay, then rs dot update row, that nothing but commit the data update to the database. Now print row updated successfully or else no matching found. So what happens is basically here we have just taken the last you can say the last name, and we are going to the next, move to the first row, assuming if it is existing, then we are just changing the last name by to Johnson. Okay, now just close all the connections. Updation done. Now deletion. Deleting rows in the database. Use the delete row method. Okay, to delete the current row in the result set. This method remove the row from a database as well as effectively deleting it. What is the code for that? Same query where you want to select the first name and the last name from customer, where the first name is Mary and the last name is Smith. Connection dot create the result type. Again, what we need is it should be sensitive as well as conquer updatable. That means again the same thing, we are updatable result sets. That means rs dot next set. If we move to the next first row, assuming that it is there, then once you move to the next, it should delete the next row, delete the current row and print row deleted successfully. That means we're just deleting the row, that's it. Or it's not a matching row found, then you close the connection and throw the catch block. If any exception is occurring, just put the exception. Now if you want to insert any row, same thing again, use the insert row method. For that, for the same query set, just we move the cursor to the first row, assuming if it is there. We rs.update. What will do is it will set the first name as well as last name. Okay, 1 as John, 2 as Smith. Now rs.insert row. Rs.insert row, what will do is it will help you to insert a new row also. That means further, if you want to keep on adding some rows, use this particular method. Then print row updated successfully. Then close all the connections. Next is transaction. What is transaction? Now transaction in JDBC consists of a series of SQL statements that must all succeed for the transaction to be committed. If any statement fails, the entire transaction should be rolled back to maintain the data consistency. Okay, that means nothing but a series of operations which is occurring linearly or sequentially to achieve a particular task. But if any in between, even if any failure is happening, then the transaction should be rolled back to the beginning again to maintain the data consistency. Now how to commit a transaction? To commit a transaction and make all the changes permanent in the database, we use the commit method. Okay, I guess it's visible, guys. Commit method of the connection object. Until the commit method is called, changes made by the SQL statements are not finalized by the database. That means only this commit method, once you call, whatever changes you have done in your program, everything will be stored in the database. Now try block. Again, one query I have given, string query update the customer set, where the update customer set street is equal to 5 Main Street, where first name equal to Bob. Some query I want to execute. Then we have a connection dot create statement. We are just creating the statement. Then you try to execute the query, update query in the sense like you are trying to update the particular value. Once it is done, you commit the transaction. Commit transaction in the sense that whatever changes you have done, everything will be reflected in the database permanently. Now if any exception is occurring, then again it will roll back if there is an error. Now what is auto commit feature? Auto commit feature is like by default JDBC enables the auto commit mode where each SQL statement is automatically committed as soon as it is executed. So sometimes what happens is, in spite of putting that commit all the time, auto commit feature is available, which will help me to commit the changes once in spite of executing the query. Once I type that you can say auto commit line, then it will get permanently stored in the database, saved in the database. Okay, to maintain transactions manually, auto commit should be disabled by calling the set auto commit to false on the connection object. That means auto commit, whatever it is there, it should be disabled first, then later it has to be enabled. Like for example, I'll explain. Like try connection dot set auto commit dot false. First you are disabling the auto commit method. You perform some SQL operation, you commit all the changes at once. Okay, now finally connection dot set auto commit is equal to true. Like enable the auto commit after transaction. Like after the transaction is done, then only you are committing, because obviously, because after before doing any transaction you can't commit it, right? Once the transaction is done, once you finish your operation, then only you can commit it. So that's why first we have set the auto commit to false. We are disabling the auto commit command before. Later, once the transaction is done, once you do all the changes, later you are finally set the auto connect to true. Now rolling back a transaction, if an error occurs during a transaction, or if the transaction needs to be cancelled or has to be cancelled, the rollback method of the connection object is used to revert all changes made in the transaction. That means if in between some kind of error is happening, it will get rolled back again from where it has started. Let's see now. Again the same thing, set auto commit equal to false. When disabling the auto commit, you perform some SQL operations. Okay, now connection dot rollback. That means if any you can say error was happened, then it has to be rolled back. Again catch exception. Finally set auto commit equal to true. Enable the auto commit after the rollback. That means once the rollback is done, you are making the changes permanently back into the database. That's all about rollback, where you are just when you are just going back to the place from where you started. Then we have a save point. Save points is nothing but save points allow you to set points within a transaction where you can roll back to a specific state without rolling back the entire transaction. That means in spite of rolling back the entire transaction, going back to the previous from the beginning state again, what we can do is we can go to a particular state also. Let's see how. First connection dot auto commit equal to false, like this we are disabling it before. Then you're performing some SQL operation. Here you're creating a save point, like sp1 is my save point. Now you are performing some more SQL operation. I am assuming somewhere around here my transaction gets rolled back. Now some error has occurred, so it will now once encounter this statement connection dot rollback sp1, it will get again roll back to this sp1 point. Okay, then you commit the changes. Finally, once you commit the changes, you will print you will say whether if it has any exception, the exception handling print will come, and then you just auto commit the feature after the transaction. Next we have is release save point. Release save point in the sense like once a save point is no longer needed, like I need a save point but I don't feel like I don't need it anywhere, so it can be released using the release save point method. The same thing, like first we have set the save point, later we have released it. That's it. That is the main changes, nothing more they have changed. Next we have is the batch execution in JDBC. What is batch execution? Let's study. Batch execution allows you to group multiple SQL statements into a batch using a add batch method. Okay, that means a multiple SQL statements execution using this method. So once added to the batch, all the statements are executed together using the execute batch method. Next we have is the add batch. What is this? How does it work? The add batch method of the statement adds a SQL statement to the batch. It takes a SQL string as its parameter and queues it for its execution. That means what will happen in add batch method, it will take all the queries, it will queue it, and then it will be sending for one by one for execution. Add batch is done, then is execute batch. Execute batch will execute all the SQL statements that has been added to the queue or to the batch. It returns an array of integers that represent the update counts for each statement in the batch. That means execute batch, what will do is it will keep on executing all the SQL statements which was lying in the queue, and also it returns the array of integers that will represent the number of update counts for each statement in the batch. Now let's see an example. First we have taken two queries. First, where the customer update the customer where the street is 5th main, where the first name is Bob, the street is 10th main, where the first name is Tom. So let's look into the code. First is query 1, query 2. Now int updates, what happens is int update statement or execute batch is used for executing this. Now you process each and every counts. For counting it, we need a for loop. For loop int count comma update counts. That means this for loop will keep an track of how many times the rows has been updated. Okay, once done, it will get committed. Then a SQL exception rises. Now what about the code explanation? Let's see. In the above example, two update commands we have seen. Two update commands, query 1 and query 2 we have passed, are added to using this add batch. Now execute batch is then used to execute both statements in one go. That means once you are using this execute batch, both the queries will be executed in one go. It will return an array of update counts containing the number of rows affected in each statements. Like once this query gets executed, once this line gets executed, you will come to know the number of rows which it was affected. Fine. Next is you can iterate over the update counts to process the result each statement's execution. Next, finally, the transaction gets committed and has to be stored in the database. Or if any failure occurs, it can get rollback from the beginning or to a particular save point. Next is benefits of batch execution. Benefits of batch execution, first is reduces the network's round trip. That means batch execution also needs to, you can see it also improves the performance. Atomicity, all statements in a batch are executed as a single unit of work, ensuring atomicity. If one statement also fails, the entire batch can be rolled off. I guess this you already have studied in DBMS when you were studying about asset properties. Next is efficiency. Efficiency when performing multiple updates or inserts, it minimizes the overhead associated with the statement execution. Next we have is metadata interface in JDBC. First is database metadata interface. So it is an interface in the JDBC used to retrieve metadata information about the database. Metadata already you know, it's an information about the particular data in the database. Next is metadata provides information like the database structure, its tables, columns, primary keys, other attributes. Now how to access the metadata? Access can be done by this method get metadata for connection object. Next is database metadata methods. First is get database product name. It, remember these guys, returns the name of the database product. Get username returns the username used to establish connection. Get URL return the URL. Get schema returns the name of all the schema. Get primary key returns the primary key and this information. Get table will return the information about the tables. Next is ResultSet metadata. ResultSet metadata provides metadata about the columns which is present. That means all the attributes then retrieved using the result.get metadata. Just remember all this method names, how they are working and what are their functionalities. Next is methods to retrieve result metadata. First is the get column count. It returns the number of columns in the result set. For each column, get column int, it will return the name of the column. Next is get column type int, it returns the SQL type of the column. Next is get column type int name, it returns the database specific type. Is nullable, it indicates whether the column has null values or not. Next is mapping SQL values into its Java types. This is a long table you can see which you have to remember, like varchar is java.lang.string, char is java.lang.string, same for long varchar. bit as boolean, numeric is java.mat.bigdecimal, tiny int as byte, small int short, integer int, big int long. Same way everything you remember. This is nothing but the SQL data type which is present, and this is all your Java data type, how they are different in their way of representation of the data type. That's it. Okay, let's move forward. Exceptional handling in JDBC. Now, what is this exceptional handling? Exceptional handling is nothing but it is mainly handled using the try, catch, and optional finally blocks. When an exception occurs, control is transferred to the nearest catch block that matches the type of exception it is thrown. Okay. Types of JDBC exceptions. First is the SQL exception. That is the most common exceptions you can see. It mainly occurs due to the SQL syntax errors. Sometimes database connection is also not done properly, or any kind of errors which is present. Methods like get next exception, get error code in SQL exception help you in retrieving the detailed error information and the vendor specific error codes effectively. That means using the get next exception and the get error code, you can get a detailed information where the error has occurred. Next is SQL warnings. What is SQL warnings? SQL warnings, like it is issued by the database or the JDBC driver. It has warnings are like they are less severe than exception, but has to be checked to ensure proper handling of database operation. Normally warnings doesn't give any error, but we make sure like whatever we code, it should not provide any warnings. Okay. Next is data truncation. Data truncation occurs when data is truncated during an insertion or update due to its size exceeding the database column's capacity. For example, if the column size is 5 or you are exceeding the database column capacity, then truncation mainly occurs. Then we have a difference between the statement and prepared statement. First is the purpose. Let's deal with statement first. Statement is mainly used for executing the static SQL queries. Compilation, execute the SQL queries directly against the database each time they are executed. Execution, suitable for executing SQL queries only, they are not parameterized. Metadata verification, verifies the metadata, that is the column types. SQL injection, directly embedding the user input into queries. Usage, it is mainly used as normal SQL queries. Whereas your prepared statement is mainly used for dynamic SQL queries with parameters. Compilation, pre-compiled only once and is stored in the database. Execution, executes parameterized SQL queries using multiple times. Also, metadata verification is done only once during the preparation. And SQL injection, it mitigates SQL injection risk by using parameterized queries. That is the main difference between prepared statement and normal statement. In exam, when you are writing, please make columns and then you write. Next is the overview of java.sql packages and interfaces. First is java.sql.blob. Blob is nothing but binary large object data type in SQL database. Java.sql.connection for making connection with the database. Next we have is callable statement for sub interface and to execute stored procedures. Java.sql.clob. Clob is nothing but character large object. SQL.date for dealing the date data type in Java. Then next is SQL driver to create an instance of database driver with this manager. Next is SQL driver manager. The driver manager will help me to get the connection, set the time logout and the time in. Then we have prepared statement for executing parameterized SQL queries and for dynamic programming and all. Java SQL ResultSet is used to results row by row. It will access the result row by row. Then save point to save and to shift to a particular point in a transaction if any rollback occurs. Then we have exception, normal exception for JDBC related exception. Then normal statement for executing SQL statement. Metadata is nothing but to retrieve information about the data in a database. So guys, that's all about module 1. These notes are mainly prepared from your prescribed textbook only, which is given under VTU syllabus. Important questions from this module will be released soon, which I will be covering all the previous year questions and all the important questions which has occurred many times in your VTU exams. If you have any doubt, please let me know in the comment section. And till then, please like, share and subscribe the channel. Thank you guys.